The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was sitting on my sister's back porch in Savannah, drinking coffee and watching the Spanish moss move in the breeze. My phone buzzed on the patio table. My son's name lit up the screen. I answered it before the second ring. Dad. His voice was tight, not the voice of a man calling to check in. She's at the storage facility, the one on Hargrove Road. I set my coffee mug down slowly. How do you know? I asked. She told me. She said she was just going to drop something off. But Dad. He stopped. I could hear him breathing. She doesn't have a key. I never gave her a key, and I just checked the app on my phone. The one that sends alerts when the unit is accessed. There was a failed entry attempt 20 minutes ago, then another one. I looked out at the moss. The breeze had gone still. Son, I said, let me call you back. I already knew what she was looking for. I had known for almost 2 years that it would come to this. That's the thing about patience. It looks like weakness from the outside. People who are in a hurry tend to mistake a slow-moving man for a man who isn't moving at all. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was something closer to a deep, exhausted sadness. Because I'd hoped I was wrong about her. I'd prayed I was wrong. There's nothing in this world that feels worse than being right about someone you wanted to be good. My son's name is Owen. He was 34 when he met her, which is old enough to know better, and young enough to still believe the best about people. That's not a criticism. I raised him to believe the best about people. That part I'll own. Her name is Renata. She came into his life during a stretch when he was lonely. He'd been out of a long relationship for about a year, throwing himself into work, living in a condo downtown that I'd helped him buy. He was doing well financially. He worked in logistics management, made a solid income. Not rich. Comfortable. He'd built something real. He met her at a birthday party for a colleague. She was the colleague's cousin visiting from Phoenix. She laughed easily. She was beautiful. And she seemed interested in everything Owen said. My son is not a man who talks about himself much. He's more of a listener. So when someone leaned in and said, "Tell me more," he wasn't prepared for how good that would feel. Within 6 months, she'd relocated from Phoenix. Within 8 months, she'd moved into his condo. I met her for the first time at Easter dinner. I cooked, same as I always do. Sweet potato pie, collard greens, ham, the whole spread. She walked in carrying a bottle of wine she'd clearly just grabbed from a gas station, and she spent most of dinner on her phone. I noticed that. I also noticed that she didn't offer to help clean up. Didn't say much to my daughter-in-law. I mean Owen's sister, my daughter. And when she did speak, every other sentence somehow circled back to money. Property values in our neighborhood. What Owen's condo could sell for now versus what he paid. Whether I planned to stay in my house or downsize. That last one she asked me directly. I smiled at her. I love my house, I said. I'm not going anywhere. She smiled back. It didn't reach her eyes. I'd been widowed for 6 years by then. My wife passed in the spring, pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. 41 years we were married. When you lose someone after that long, your home becomes the place that holds them. Every room, the garden she planted, the kitchen where she kept her recipes in a red binder on the second shelf. I wasn't leaving that house for anything. But I'll tell you what I did do, not long after that Easter dinner. I made some calls. I'm not a wealthy man in the way people use that word on television. I'm comfortable. I worked 30 years in civil engineering for the county, retired with a pension, kept my spending modest, invested carefully. The house is paid off. I have savings, I have accounts, nothing flashy, nothing that would make the news, but enough that someone paying attention would notice, and Renata was paying attention. It started small. She asked Owen whether I'd written a will. She framed it as concern. I just want to make sure your dad has everything in order for your sake. Then she started coming around more, offering to help me with things I hadn't asked for help with. Once she called a plumber to my house without asking me, then sent Owen the bill to forward to me. I paid it, said nothing. She asked me once, very casually, about the storage unit on Hargrove Road. I'd had that unit for 12 years. My late wife and I rented it originally to store furniture when we had the floors refinished, and I'd kept it ever since. Old documents, some of her things I couldn't bring myself to part with, a few boxes of files from my working years. Nothing anyone would care about to look at. But there's a funny thing about a locked door that someone is told not to open. It starts to glow. In certain people's imaginations. It starts to feel like it must be hiding something valuable. "What do you keep in there?" Renata asked me. We were in my kitchen, Owen in the other room watching a game. "Old memories," I said. "My wife's things." She nodded, that same smile. "Of course. That's sweet." 2 weeks later, she asked Owen the same question. He told her he didn't know, that I'd always kept that unit private, that it was mine. She pushed a little. He told me about it that weekend, laughing it off. I wasn't laughing. I called my attorney the next morning. His name is Gerald. I've known him for 22 years, since before Owen was in high school. I told him what I'd been observing for the past several months, and I told him what I wanted to do. He listened. He asked a few questions. Then he said, "Marvin always used to say the same thing. The best time to build a fence is before you need one." He was talking about my brother. Gerald knew our whole family. "That's right," I said. "Let's start building. What we did wasn't complicated. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of thing that people with good financial advisors do every day, and most people don't even know it's possible. We set up a revocable living trust. My house, my investment accounts, my savings, all of it moved into the trust. I remained the trustee, so nothing changed in my daily life. I still controlled everything. But it meant that when I passed, none of those assets would go through probate. There would be nothing for anyone to contest, nothing to pick through, no public record of what was left or who got what. Everything had already been decided, quietly, and it would transfer exactly the way I'd specified. My daughter was named as successor trustee. Owen would receive his share, a good share, because I loved my son and I wanted to take care of him, but it would be structured in a way that protected it. Disbursed over time, not a lump sum that a smart woman could see coming and position herself to intercept. I didn't tell Owen I'd done this. I thought about it. But I knew that if I told him, he'd say something to Renata, not out of malice, but because that's how marriages work. People talk. And I needed this to be quiet. I did do one more thing. I went to the storage unit and I reorganized it. I put my wife's things, her photo albums, the letters she'd saved, a box of ornaments she'd collected over 30 years. I put those things somewhere safe. Brought some of them home, actually. They belonged in the house anyway. What I left in the storage unit was a file box, clearly labeled, bank statements from 1987 through 1994. Tax returns from years so long ago they no longer mattered legally. An old insurance policy that had been paid out and closed. A certificate for savings bonds that had matured and been redeemed before Owen was born, the kind of paperwork that looks, to someone who doesn't know, like it could be valuable, like it could be the thing someone was hiding. I locked the unit. I drove home. I cooked dinner. And then I waited. I won't pretend it was easy to watch. Over the following months, I watched my son change in small ways that worried me. He stopped calling as much. When he did call, there was a guardedness in him, like he was listening for how I answered his questions rather than just talking to me. She was narrating me to him, I realized, telling him a story about who his father was and what I was doing and why. I didn't know exactly what she was saying, but I could feel the shape of it in how he held himself when they visited. She started to push more openly. She suggested to Owen that since I was getting older, I was 67, perfectly healthy, still walking 4 miles a day. Maybe he should have power of attorney, just in case, so he could help me manage things. Owen brought it up to me awkwardly at brunch, not quite able to look me in the eye. I looked at him for a moment. This boy I had coached in Little League and helped with his college essays and driven to the airport more times than I could count. Who brought this up? I asked him. He hesitated. Owen. She mentioned it, he said. She said she was just thinking ahead, that she worries about you. She doesn't need to worry about me, I said quietly. I have Gerald. I have your sister. Everything is in order. You know that. He nodded. We didn't talk about it again that day, but I could see something shifting in him, like a man standing on a slope, not quite realizing he's been moving downhill. That was 8 months before the Tuesday morning in Savannah. I called Gerald from my sister's porch. It's happening, I said. He didn't ask what I meant. You want me to make the call to the facility? Please. The storage facility on Hargrove Road had an agreement with Gerald's office. Nothing official, just a long professional relationship. When I'd reorganized the unit, I'd also spoken with the manager there, a man I'll call Theodore's replacement because the original manager had retired and I'd only just met the new one. I explained that I was concerned about unauthorized access. He told me about their camera system. We exchanged cards. What I knew, and Renata didn't, was that any tampering with the lock would be recorded, time-stamped, and reported. She hadn't gotten inside. Owen's app confirmed the failed attempts. But she'd been there. She'd tried. And now there was a record. I called Owen back. Have you talked to her since she left? I asked. She said she left. Said it wasn't the right unit. She was confused. His voice was careful. Testing something. She wasn't confused, I said. She knew exactly where she was. Silence. Dad, I'm not angry with you, I said. I want you to know that first. But I need you to listen to me for a few minutes. Can you do that? He said yes. I told him everything. Not the legal structure. That wasn't the point right now. I told him what I'd observed over the past 2 years. Specific incidents. The question about the storage unit in my kitchen. The power of attorney conversation. The plumber. The way she'd asked me about the house at Easter dinner. I listed them the way you'd list evidence, calmly, without embellishment, because I'd been keeping notes and I didn't need to exaggerate anything. He was quiet for a long time. I know how this feels, I said. I know you love her. And I know hearing your father say these things about your wife feels like a betrayal. I need you to know I've sat with this for a long time before saying a word to you. I didn't want to be right. She told me you never liked her, he said. I don't dislike her, I said. I don't know her well enough to dislike her. What I know is what she's shown me. And what she showed me this morning is that she went to a storage unit that doesn't belong to her and tried to get inside. Another long silence. Owen, what did you tell her was in there? Very quietly, I told her I didn't know. She kept asking. I said maybe some of Mom's things. He stopped. I told her it was probably worth looking into. I let that sit for a moment. Okay, I said. Okay. What I didn't tell Owen then, what I told him later when we were sitting at my kitchen table and he'd come alone without her, was about the trust. I walked him through all of it. Gerald had prepared a summary document. Plain language, clear. Owen read through it slowly. He asked questions. Good questions. Careful questions. The kind that told me he was actually processing it rather than reacting. When he finished, he sat back and rubbed his face with both hands. You did all this, he said, and you never said anything to me. I didn't want you to have to carry it, I said. I didn't want you looking at her differently because of something your father suspected. I wanted you to make your own observations. And now you've seen something yourself, I said. Not through my eyes, your app, your phone. You told me she was there. He stared at the table for a while. Your mother, I said, and I had to stop for a second. Even after 6 years, it still catches me sometimes, just the word. Your mother used to say that you can't protect someone from a truth they're not ready to hear. You can only make sure the truth is still there waiting when they're ready. I straightened the papers in front of me. I've been waiting. Owen cried a little there at the kitchen table. He's not a crier. He never has been. I handed him a napkin, and I didn't make anything of it. He and Renata separated 3 months after that. I won't paint it as simple or clean, because it wasn't. There were weeks where he was angry at me, weeks where he went back and forth, weeks where I barely heard from him. I gave him space. I didn't push. I'd said what I needed to say, shown him what I needed to show him, and the rest belonged to him. She'd hired an attorney of her own by then. There was talk of contesting, claiming she had some entitlement to assets she'd been expecting. I never quite understood the legal theory there, and neither did Gerald, honestly. There was nothing to contest. The trust had been established before any of this came to a head. Everything was documented. Her attorney apparently reviewed the structure and advised her that there was no angle worth pursuing. The storage unit came up in their proceedings. It turned out to be the thing she was most frustrated about. She had genuinely believed there was something valuable there, cash maybe, or deeds, or something she could point to as hidden wealth. When it was confirmed that the unit contained old tax records and expired financial documents, and absolutely nothing of present value, her attorney described her reaction as significant disappointment. I'll be honest. I allowed myself a moment with that one. My daughter called me on a Sunday evening in early October after everything had settled down. She has 3 kids, my grandchildren. The oldest is 12, the youngest just turned 6. She'd stayed out of it mostly, trusting me to handle what needed handling, checking in but not inserting herself. That's who she is. "Dad," she said, "how are you actually doing?" I thought about that. I was sitting in the kitchen. The red binder with her mother's recipes was on the shelf right where it always was. The garden outside had gone to its fall colors, the mums I'd planted in September coming up orange and yellow the way my wife always liked. "I'm okay," I said, and I meant it. It went the way it needed to go. "Owen called me," she said. "He said he's doing better. Said you two had dinner last week." We had. He'd come over and we'd eaten at the kitchen table and watched the game afterward, and mostly we just sat in the same room like the old days, before all of it. He'd apologized. I told him there was nothing to apologize for. He said there was. I let him have that. He's a good son, I told my daughter. He just needed time to see clearly. "You both did," she said. I smiled at that. I suppose she was right. I think about what Renata was actually looking for, in the end. Not in the storage unit specifically, but in all of it, what she thought she was walking into when she walked into my son's life. She saw the condo, the steady income, the comfortable father with the paid-off house and the pension and the accounts. She added it up the way certain people add things up, and she decided it was a number worth pursuing. But what she never counted was the actual cost. The cost of being someone your father-in-law can't trust. The cost of being the woman who shows up at a locked storage unit with ambition and no key. The cost of what it does to a man, slowly, when he starts to see the person he loves through a different kind of light. She thought the prize was in the unit. She thought if she could get inside, she'd find the thing that made all of it worth it. There was nothing in there worth having. There never was. What was worth having was sitting right here, at this kitchen table, in this house. And Sunday phone calls from my daughter and quiet dinners with my son and 6-year-old grandchildren who still climb into my lap and ask me to tell them a story. That's what I have. That's what nobody was ever going to take. And in the end, the woman who came looking for a number never understood that the real inheritance had no dollar sign on it at all. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, turning it over in my mind the way you turn a stone in your hand, not looking for anything in particular, just feeling the weight of it. What I keep coming back to is this. Renata didn't fail because I outmaneuvered her. She failed because of who she chose to be the moment she walked through my son's door. Every question she asked me at that Easter table, every smile that didn't reach her eyes, every time she steered a conversation toward property values or account balances. That was a choice, a small one maybe, on its own. But choices stack. They accumulate. And eventually the pile gets tall enough that people can see it from a distance, even when you think you've kept it hidden. I made choices too. I chose patience over confrontation. I chose documentation over argument. I chose to protect my son quietly rather than force him to pick a side before he was ready to see clearly. Those choices stacked too. And when it mattered, they held. That's what I want to say to anyone who recognizes something in this story. Maybe a version of Renata in their own life, or maybe a version of Owen, someone they love who can't quite see what's right in front of them. You cannot argue someone into clarity. You cannot force a person to see what they're not ready to see. What you can do is stay steady, build what needs to be built. Keep your own house in order, literally and otherwise, and trust that truth doesn't expire. It just waits. Owen is a good man. He always was. What happened to him wasn't weakness. It was inexperience, and inexperience is just the tax you pay for not having lived long enough yet. I don't fault him for it. What I fault myself for, looking back, is the months I spent hoping I was wrong instead of acting on what I already knew. Hoping costs time, and time is the one thing none of us gets back. The real lesson I took from all of it isn't about trusts or attorneys or storage units. It's about the difference between looking and seeing. Renata looked at my family and saw assets. She calculated. She planned, but she never actually saw us, who we were to each other, what we'd built over decades, how deep those roots went. She thought she was hunting for treasure in a storage unit when the thing she never counted was how much we valued each other more than any of it. Intelligence without character is just a sharper instrument for causing damage. That's something my wife used to say, and I didn't fully understand it until I watched someone intelligent make every wrong choice with great efficiency. Owen and I had dinner last week. We didn't talk about any of this. We watched the game. I made the same pot of chili I've been making since he was 12. He asked for seconds. That was enough. That was everything, actually. Build something real. Protect it quietly. Love the people who deserve it. And when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time, even when it costs you something to do it. That's the only wisdom I have. It took me 67 years to earn it, and I'm still paying the tuition.